Carla, it is 2:01 p.m. and we're all ready to go. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Russ. It's so nice to what you do for us every week, and we've really enjoyed the Zoom training this morning. If any of you got into the late part of that, we're always asking questions. So hello to everyone and welcome to FGDLA's Government Learning and Technology Symposium. I'm Carla Lane. I'm the Vice President of Higher Education Sector and the moderator for today's event. FGDLA is a nonprofit professional association formed to promote the development and the application of distance learning at the federal government. We actively foster collaboration and understanding among those involved in leveraging technology and instructional media in support of the education and training needs of the federal government. Our members are derived primarily from the agencies involved with the federal government. We invite you to join with us in this exciting field. Our URL is fgdla.us. For upcoming events, I'm going to switch the slide, Melissa. Thank you. For upcoming events, we'll start the new year on January 18th with John DeFonso of Moodle, and he'll be presenting on Moodle for Government. And on February 8th, John Mahoney from Learning in the White Space will present information about job aids and performance support for distance learning. And we are so proud that Zoom is our valued sponsor for FGDLA and has been instrumental in helping us produce and promote all of these webinars and workshops. They are the best sponsor that we could have and the best partner that we could have. Russ, we want to thank you again for everything that you do for us.
Very welcome, Carla. Very welcome.
Thank you. So today's topic is a 2-hour workshop, not a one, but it's a 2-hour workshop about helping subject matter experts create strong courses when they have little to no background as an instructional designer. We have an expert in this field to lead the workshop. Dr. Melissa Dickman is a course developer at the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Design at the Metropolitan State University at Denver. Her research about institutional support of SMEs creating online courses and programs has added significantly to the field. And as part of the workshop, we've added an expert group of panelists made up of FGDLA board members. They are Dr. Philip Westphal, who's chairman of the board, Dr. Jolly Holden, who's executive director, Russ Colbert, who's a vice president of the corporate sector, and I'll round out the group. You can ask questions in the chat or come off mute and ask questions throughout the workshop. So don't be shy. We want this to be very interactive and we want you to be as engaged as you want to be. Dr. Dickman, we are so happy you could develop this workshop for FGDLA. Welcome and thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It is great to be here. As you mentioned, the research, this is a presentation on research-based instructional strategies and techniques to support those subject matter experts. And everybody heard that, right?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure you hit the wrong button sometimes. So today, I have a small agenda. It's I love to welcome everybody because this is a great opportunity for myself, first of all. And then we're going to go over what instructional design is. What is the support? Some ADDIE initiative. It's just an idea to give people on the right track sometimes when they're planning. We're going to talk about some instructional strategies and techniques, and then planning for the future. And then there's an extra space for questions. So I want to welcome and good afternoon and welcome. I am excited to be here to discuss research-based strategies and techniques to support subject matter experts in the creation of courses, programs, and training for multiple methods of delivery. Research and experience has shown me that there's a lot of methods available to support subject matter experts when creating courses, programs, and trainings for multiple means of delivery. Not everyone can or will use the same methods or distribution of learning, but there is a foundational information that can be referenced, just as the ADDIE model and Merrill's first principles of instruction. They give foundational concepts to the instructional design field. There are research-based strategies and techniques to support subject matter experts in the design and delivery, whether instructional design trained or not. First, we need to define what is an instructional design process. So that instructional design process is a system-based approach to creating instruction to solve a problem or reach a learning outcome using research and experience-based models. Next, we defined support. I was having a conversation with Mr. Holden before all this began, and some institutions define support differently. So one question I want to ask the group before I start is, what comes to mind when you're asked what is support for a subject matter expert? Anyone? What is support? What comes to mind? Is it a media specialist? Is it what would you say is support at your institution? Data. So that data as in analysis, technology support. Technology support is a very huge window from what I've seen.
Also media development, gamification, general writing, putting
Right.
structure together.
Okay. So research indicates that there are multiple methods of support when working with subject matter experts. So support is defined by the concentration of opportunities connected to teaching and learning that involve collaborative experience with peers and experts demonstrating best practices. Some examples are the technology is a large one, pedagogical or andragogical options, instructional professional development, and then there are also financial allocations. Sometimes it's time, sometimes it's finances. Subject matter experts have, depending on their organization, they have a large, what is the word I'm looking for? Sorry. They have a large responsibility. So when they are added an extra responsibility to build a new course or training, they need those allocations of either time or finances at times. So then an ADDIE initiative is just it's not the ADDIE model for actually designing a course, but it's the use of a foundational model to discover what would be the best practices for the stakeholders or the group. One institution analyzed their situation, stakeholder perspective, and organizational needs to find they needed a robust support team and organized development program. They concluded to create one-on-one experiences for subject matter experts to build courses that would be measured by a national standard and an institutional standard. So one was Quality Matters, which is the national standards, but then they also had a peer review standard. So the design of the program did not happen overnight, but has been in process and continual improvement for multiple years, adding and subtracting methods and practices. The development of that expert support team, technical resources, and delivery of the course creation program began with a small group of subject matter experts and was not an institution-wide program. It is now an institution-wide program. Implementation of the model was not a full-scale representation of what is now available, but began with a basic design of the program and development of resources. So they've developed their resources over the years, and you can't expect this to happen overnight. The evaluation of the program is continual and conducted at the end of each course creation cycle. So this institution evaluates their cycle and their program and their resources twice a year to verify they are still on the right track for what their stakeholders need. So a quick question is, does anybody have a process currently at their organization of how to define the needs of subject matter experts when they're creating any kind of micro-learning or trainings? Even at an institution you work for or at the organization you are with the government? Is there does anybody know of one? If there's a no, oh, there's a no. So
let me add something then, Melissa. I mean,
sure.
I work at Capella University, and there we do have an instructional design group. And so we have subject matter experts who are assigned to people who are instructional designers within that particular office, and they work together to put everything together. And then we have review boards, and there's a media development group, and so there's all sorts of support to really help the SMEs get along with it. I'm an instructional designer, so I drive the other instructional designers crazy, but still, I get great ideas from them because it's, nobody should live in isolation. So I think that's really an important thing. And I think it really is helpful. And if the caliber of our courses has significantly improved over the years, because so many of our instructional designers also have PhDs in instructional design. And that really makes a significant difference in the way we think about content and the academics of it. And the same thing happens in training. So our training goes through that same process.
So that is a great form of support. And sometimes I've seen where the focus is on the subject matter expert or the focus is on the instructional design group. So it changes what the subject matter expert is willing to input. So this was a question I already asked, so we will move on to some instructional strategies. And Dr. Lane, you've mentioned a few of these. Some of the instructional strategies are expert support. That could be an expert in media, an expert in tools and technology. If I recall, Capella used Blackboard, so there would be some expert in Blackboard. Other institutions use a different either learning management system or content management system. So those are different views and different ways to use those materials. There's also that professional development. You mentioned a little bit of that too. Some of that professional development could be the learning management system. If you do not know how to use the system you are putting a course into, then it makes it very hard to actually reach your goals and outcomes of whatever you're trying to train. Some of the tools that are available, I recall somebody speaking about virtual reality. Is that subject matter expert supposed to be an expert in
Hello.
Oh, somebody just answered a phone. Is that subject
good.
matter
How are you,
expert
Shelley?
supposed to be in
Is it Chayani?
is that subject matter expert supposed to be an expert in the virtual reality also, because that's a technology tool. Instructional design. Do they have, there is groups out there that actually teach instructional design to faculty or give certifications. So that's another strategy for support. The delivery method, there's experts in those delivery methods also, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. One of the representations in the research that I did was there was no choice. Everybody had to move to online. So that changed an entire support group to focus on how are they going to help those faculty or subject matter experts and faculty compose online when they have never even used the learning management system. So it's a very interesting transition. So another question I have is, what instructional strategies are being used at your organization? How do you know it is working? So Dr. Lane, you mentioned that you guys have a support group and that is a collaborative effort. Does anybody else have something that they do at their institution, whether it is standard trainings? Are there required trainings? Are there suggested trainings? In one institution, an example I had is there was no required trainings, but it was highly recommended and they were paid to actually attend the professional development. So that was a huge difference for one institution, is they paid their subject matter experts to go through a training because they were moving to a new learning management system. So they put them through an entire training. They said they had 95% attendance. They were paid. And they had, with that 95% attendance, they actually had a better results in their learning management system. So we have a requirement for all new instructor subject matter experts to ascend a certificate program, and we pay for that. That is excellent. And I have seen in the research that paying them and paying for that certification actually encourages them to do it, because then they feel valued about their time and their efforts in what they're doing.
Shonda, is that through the association or is that each individual agency. Why don't
Yeah,
you
I'm
come-
sorry, I can't, I logged in with my Training Officers Consortium logo there, but I'm actually at the Office of Comptroller Currency for Department of Treasury, and here the OCC is, we have a high number of SME instructors. So we do ask that if you're new to instructing, that you complete a certificate program for instructor training, and we do ask that you do that on your work time, and the OCC pays for it. So
Okay, and so within the association, is that sort of a general rule for most of the organizations?
oh, okay.
that are involved?
That's a good question. I think that's something worth asking those who are participants in the TOC. Yeah.
Okay, I'm so glad you're here today. Thanks for joining.
Oh, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for letting me.
Okay.
So that's excellent. And then Mr. Holden actually said that LinkedIn Learning has several videos on the ADDIE model and instructional strategies. So if you are an organization that supports LinkedIn, or you have there are some institutions that pay for that service, and your faculty or subject matter experts can actually just go in and take some trainings, those could be recommended. So then some of the techniques, a huge technique I saw that is extremely relevant is the construction of knowledge, where they build on experience and that subject matter expertise. So that requirement of those new instructors, those new subject matter experts to attend a certificate program, you're adding to that knowledge, that experience of what they might not have seen. I have seen in some institutions where the subject matter expert says, I need to see what is a good course that has similar goals. I need to see what a bad online environment is before I really know if I'm doing good or bad. They've never seen a good video, or they've seen a very bad course and they don't know what a good course actually is, or a good training. So then some of you might have answered some of these already. Let's see, the technique implementing. So some of the other techniques are implementing that professional development, like that certificate program, but then also learning practices. Collaboration with peers and experts has been a huge inspiration and useful resource for subject matter experts, because they're communicating with their peers. Maybe one of their peers has more experience in building a video or building some other type of learning material, and that helps them move forward. So that is a way for them to support. Again, the monetary allocations that came up very often, whether it's time or finances, and then that instructional support to include instructional elements. If they are a subject matter expert, they have not necessarily been trained to teach or train others. So they don't have that background or experience. So building on that experience and giving them small snippets of instructional practices is very beneficial.
And Melissa, one of the things I've seen that has been so useful, and it's along the same lines as having a mentor, but to have an official coach, so that when somebody gets stuck as they're developing a course, they can call this person and say, well, this is the problem. What do you think I should do? And they can discuss it. And so the person always feels supported. I think that that's really an important element in this, is that you don't want people floundering around and feeling stupid. And that coach can really help that. And it doesn't cost much.
Right. And it's there are some institutions that actually have a mentor program where they actually work with that mentor, and they meet with them on a regular basis. If you have worked in any place that has a cycle, the institution for this research, they actually build a cycle. So that means that subject matter expert works with media, instructional design, and technology support experts for 3 months. So they actually have 3 months of making a call to say, I'm not sure how to do this, or we've discussed the outcomes or the objectives for this, and we we're not sure how to do this. So they get other ideas, they get examples. So that support and coaching can go so many different ways. It doesn't have to be, well, you have this one person, this one mentor. You could actually have a coaching group where you have an expert in different fields, because nobody can know everything. Nobody knows everything, especially with that instructional design group. There are some, they have a specific support group where it's a just-in-time piece where they can call in and say, hey, I have this quick question. I don't need a 3-month-long thing. I just have this question on how I do this one thing. And then having that support also, it doesn't have to be a big, long process, but you actually have to have somebody there that they can call.
The other thing is, I mean, since we're an association, Shonda is, with the training officers, which is another association, ISTE, USTLA. I mean, where there are so many wonderful professional organizations that revolve around training, distance learning, higher education, and all the things that all of us are interested in. And so, if somebody called us, called FGDLA and said, I need help, can you help me? So we could probably find somebody. We have over 600 members. So there's probably somebody who could have some answers, or we could refer someone to another association. But I think that that's part of why we're all here, is the collaboration. Mm-hmm. and not feeling alone, and feeling very supported, and not feeling like you're a box of rocks, so.
And not knowing, sometimes you just don't know, and you need to communicate it with somebody so that you can actually get that better perspective. Molly mentions an online community of practice anchored by a website with capability for forums and to curate, provide resources is a great support. Follow-up after training is needed for accountability. Those are great points, because I've seen one where there is a searchable website where they can actually search a topic, find a quick video or job aid that helps them with their struggle.
A couple of years ago, when we were doing conferences, Dr. Phil, maybe you want to come off of mute and answer this. A couple of years ago, when you put together the field of what we were calling at the time birds of a feather, we were doing face-to-face conferences and having birds of a feather. So it was people who had similar interests meeting, but we could do that online as well. And would talk about that for a second, would you, Dr. Phil?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand. You said when we got together some years ago.
Yeah, when we were talking about groups that have similar interests, and we were putting together.
Oh, the special interest groups. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking of instructional design. Okay. Yeah, that was the one of the things that some organizations have, and they're called SIGs, or special interest groups, are communities of interest, or communities of common interest that are within a larger organization. So, like the Federal Government Disciplinary Association might have special interest groups in just instructional design. They're more interested in those kinds of issues, or media selection, and have one, and particular media. Maybe, hey, we do a lot of video conferencing, a lot of Zooming. So bring the Zoom people together, as well as other media. So that's something that we're hoping to develop. We had initially were going to base it on our annual conferences. We have changed. In fact, Dr. Caroline had a really great idea of moving GLTS more into webinars, workshops, but to go online. And so as that develops and we get our membership base more stable, then what we'll do is we'll create those special interest groups.
Okay. Thank you.
And it'll just be up to the membership, what they want to do. Special interest groups, and I'll find out, I'll coordinate, assuming I'm still the guru for that, coordinate how many people are going to be in each special interest group. If it's a special interest group of one, you might want to join something else, but we may have a common interest that we can't anticipate. So this would be for the members to decide how they want to be organized in communities of interest.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, sure you bet.
So that actually rolls into that question of what techniques to construct knowledge and experience are used at your organization, and is it continually evaluated? Molly's comment on that need for accountability is huge. There's that feedback piece, and not always the feedback to say, yes, it was fantastic, I liked the videos, but did you get something out of it? Can you promote any kind of, uh-oh. Can you promote any kind of experience and learning with that piece? Did something get learned, or did you construct new knowledge? Sorry, I get a little distracted when some of the little the microphones are open. So so does anybody have any additional techniques that they've used? You guys talked about a group. Peer groups are actually great. I've seen that across a few campuses where they actually do that community of practice, and it connects to different things. There's some community of practices that are maybe reading books on new information, universal design, implementing universal design. So any other techniques? I'm not quite sure how many. There's about 13 people here. So anyone else?
I think just faculty meetings are really important, or training department meetings. I think so often, particularly in higher education, we get to the point where, you know, you've got an advanced degree and God forbid somebody should tell you that you need additional training. But my doctorate is 30 years old. And so if I had not continued my own personal development, my own training, my own involvement with things, I wouldn't be able to teach at the level that I do now. And I think that that's really an important consideration. Continuing education, lifelong learning. Those are important considerations for all of us, and particularly at training in within organizations. There's so much training that goes on, but most of it is very specific to some sort of an object or some process within the organization, but it may not involve the advancement of the human, who is truly the human resource for that organization. And if those humans don't progress, the organization doesn't progress. And so it's really important that we continue to feed them, to give them additional information and not just the nuts and bolts of what they have to do tomorrow.
So that's like that professional development where the organization can support professional development while they bring in somebody that might be helping them reach their goals. What do the subject matter experts need? And that's truly the question, is what does that organization need for support? Institutions, college institutions, they each need something different. A community college needs something very different than what a university needs. They have different support types and different financial structures. So they have different pieces that they can do or they're willing to do. But what does the subject matter expert need? Do they need somebody to come in and just do a quick training? Or do they need somebody that is on staff that can help them with that quick call? So that's part of that, analyzing what the institution or organization needs to move forward so they can support those subject matter experts, and that subject matter expert can build their knowledge.
And subject matter experts need different things. I mean, military subject matter experts in training need very different things than somebody who works at Treasury, or somebody who works at U.S. Department of Education, or somebody who works at an online university. I mean, we're all different and we're not interchangeable, although we've got the basics of it as instructional designers. But the other part of it, Melissa, is that instructional designers need to continue their education as well. Because if you were doing gamification 10 years ago, well, that's pretty old news. So,
and Flash does not work anymore. So now you have to move into a different program. So exactly. So then we move to those subject matter experts. Again, each subject matter expert has different set of knowledge, experience, and instructional practices. Using multiple methods of support can build each subject matter expert in the area they need to create effective learning experiences for participants across the organization. So that is not just each group is different. So some of the federal government organizations might need a different type of support. They might need a different a different group or a different topic. They might not need the same things as that faculty subject matter expert that's at a university that needs to know how to use that learning management system that they are required to use. So those are different aspects. What are some of the tools that they have to use? What are some of the practices they have to use? Is it a micro learning piece that they are building, or is it a long course or program that takes a week or 4 hours or a day?
Oh. I was wondering, Dr. Jolly, come off mute, and you've got the background of both. You have military background, extensive, and you're now a functioning faculty member at the doctoral level. So what do you see as the differences between what the instructional designers needed at those two different places?
The basics of instructional design, starting at the foundation level, which is besides the needs analysis that one would assume would be able to be completed. That's why they're calling in the SMEs. But just as basis in designing sound instructional objectives. From learning objectives stems your instructional strategies, your learning strategies, assessments, quizzes, things of that nature. So they have to have a foundation in the basics of what comprises an instructional designer and the responsibilities of an instructional designer. So if you're using ADDIE as an example, you've got 5 distinct components of that. Some call it a waterfall model. It's an iterative model. Those that experience in ADDIE, it works quite well. They approach it differently than somebody that's just learning it. But when that was developed for the military by Gagne, my goodness, 50, 60 years ago, you have to remember that the military is very adept at following instructions and step-by-step procedures. So the ADDIE was used as a step-by-step. As it matured and as it got more experience out there, it became more of an iterative approach. That you're constantly refining your instructional strategies, constantly refining the content. Training, whether it be military, federal government, and corporate, or higher education, training is training. It's the how to do something. Education is the why. Now they may have different techniques on how to train. A drill sergeant in the Army would be much different than a new student at a college, but nonetheless, the concepts are basically the same.
Okay, thank you.
So then we move into the organizational action of support. So what does that mean? That's the technology. So that organization, how are they supporting that subject matter expert? I mentioned VR, virtual reality. That is popular in some areas for firefighters, emergency workers, and those items. What is the organization doing to help the people that are using the virtual reality, but they're the subject matter expert in another way? They might not be the technology person. So then is that organization can support the subject matter expert by having a specialist in the learning management system or the content management system, and then the tools used for training. Well, it could be simulations. They could be in airline simulations. I've seen institutions, and I'm not sure of the military, but I'm assuming there's some training on flying, unless they have to do that before they get into the military. But then how is that organizational supporting the delivery method? Are they explaining to the subject matter expert or training them on theory and practice? Depending on what delivery method they're using. Are they using the online, the hybrid, the traditional face-to-face, the conference? Each one of those has a different need for that subject matter expert. What can they do to build that course? So how are they supporting the subject matter expert on the delivery method as well? And then there is that organization can support the subject matter expert with experts in the field. So there's an expert in technology. There's a material creations expert. There's that instructional designer. Because that subject matter expert might not know, they're not going to know everything. And then what about that expert on media? Media is a very interesting beast. I'm going to call it a beast right now, because if you are trying to teach a very visual concept, that subject matter expert are they required to put accessibility items into that media? That changes how they're actually going to demonstrate whatever they're working on. So that expert in media can help that subject matter expert build an actual piece of material that can work for all of the learners, not just universal design, but maybe somebody that with a cognitive or developmental need. Subject matter experts, who are their students, that analysis, who are their participants and who are their learners. So that changes maybe what they need in that media item. So then that organizational action, the experts to assist with the creating of materials or using the learning management system or content management system, they can be consultants. Do you need, that's part of that analysis. Do you need to hire somebody full-time, or can you bring in a consultant that says, this is a training that we are going to do for these subject matter experts because we're doing a special program? Do they need that full-time employee with that set job title and job location so they have constant access to that person? There's also external resources or training. Some of you have mentioned more, some of the other features that are out there. One resource is the Association for Talent Development, or ATD. They actually provide instructional design training certifications. Is that something that you send subject matter experts out to do at a third-party piece so that you don't have to build that in-house, but they're getting that training and support that they need? Because sometimes you don't have to build everything in-house or have everything in-house. You might need a consultant. You might need just that external resource because you have specialists. And then the program supports, there's actually many learning management systems. You can actually go to that learning management system and use their support personnel, and then in-house doesn't need to do that. There's also, again, video editing can be an outsourced depending on the need. If you're doing 4 to 5 media pieces, you might end up doing outsourcing that. UJA and a few other programs, they actually, you can pay them per hour or per word on closed caption. So
let me interrupt you just for a second, Melissa. I think one of the things that we do forget is that the instructional designer, while they need ongoing training to stay up with the field, when you begin working with a SME, the SME has to train the ID on the topic. And that is a part that it can take 10 minutes or it can take 10 days. It depends on how difficult the topic really is, but we have to allow for that, and I think that so often in our discussions, we assume that the ID will just, pick up everything and run with it. And that's just not something that we can do. I mean, I've written for medical stuff and butchers. I mean, I've done so many bizarre and strange things, and that's what I love about my job. Never, no day is the same. But I've always had to go in with the idea that somebody has to train me first and at least get me to the point where I can do something. The other thing I wanted to mention, Molly, come off mute and add in what you were talking about a moment or so ago.
she actually said she had to step out into a meeting and she looks over to the recording. So I can actually speak to this. The culture of an agency plays a role as well. That is very true. There are data. There are some cultures and institutions and organizations that only want the data and they only live by the data, and they haven't looked at either the education or other types of support, and they only look at the participant surveys. So I've seen that in a few areas. She also states it may be more an industrial age type of learning, as most of us grew up in this system. Let's see. So some are more data focused and education versus performance focused. Each project and team will be different, and you need to figure that out up front. Honestly, I just worked on a chemistry class. I am not a chemist. I'm not close to a chemist. It was a very big learning experience because in this current course, they needed a lot of data, and they had to pull from a whole lot of different programs and databases. So I had to learn what he needed before, like you said, Carla, I had to learn what he needed and the goal of his course before we could build it to and be that support for him. So it really is seeing what the team entails and what the team needs before you move forward to say, this is what every organization needs as support. Because that's not true. Every organization, every group might need something different. There are subject matter experts that need what we call hands-on. They need a hand holding. You walk them through every step of the process and every creation of every item, every word you put into their course alignment map. But then there's others where you can explain the concept and they can run with it. So you have to have support for each of those groups, right?
Mhm. True.
And let's see, I think my next question is, what organizational actions are in place that you know of currently? So do they have a tech support group? Do they have, Russ is our Zoom expert. So if I have trouble with Zoom, I can reach out to Russ currently and say, what did I just do? I think I muted everybody and kicked them all out of the meeting, which I did not. But, you know, as Russ is our expert, do you have experts in your organization? Do you have, what are some of the things that you know of in your organization that support subject matter experts? Carly, you mentioned that instructional design, that group. Does anybody have another one?
Well, Melissa, I'll speak from being the teletraining officer for the Navy for about 4 years, based in Virginia Beach, and we had at least 4 or 5 people that were stationed around the hub of our operations and at remote locations, so that they could react to a problem, either an operational problem or an instructional design question, or looking for guidance or advice. So yes, in the Navy, we had a team of people that could assist for day-to-day operations or planning for tomorrow's or next month's class that we were working on, making a transition from traditional teaching to teaching online.
You know, Russ, you're also, I mean, some of your clients for Zoom, like the World Health Organization, United Nations, what do you find with them?
There are a lot of these large customers, and this morning I was working with a customer, a large insurance company, and they have a lot of people, a lot of support people, and these support people are available virtually. Sometimes they hide behind a help desk, and that's not a bad word. They are located behind a help desk, and they're in queues to assist customers. So when there's a technical problem with technology, you know, good organizations have people that can assist the subject matter expert, and assist Kim Scott, for example, if there's a question. They really need to have, organizations need, or it would be recommended they have a team of people to assist.
That assistance can be like instant assistance, or I've seen the queue systems where they send in a ticket and they're asking questions.
Yes.
I also, before working in higher ed and in between working in higher ed, I worked for a corporation that was nationwide. So they had specific groups of people that they would call for assistance. We had virtual and video experts. We had all kinds of experts that would actually help that subject matter expert as they built a conference presentation, so that they didn't have to figure out how to make that graphic or the job aid, because that is not where their time needed to be spent. They had that expert that could help them with that to support the subject matter expert and also the training and the program.
Definitely, Melissa. We as a company have 2 levels of support, actually 3 levels. So it can be a phone call. So a user or an owner or an admin of an account can place a phone call to a level 1 service desk, a level 2 service desk, or they can place an online ticket, a support ticket, and that takes a little bit longer, but the phone call is normally the fastest method, where you can have an answer within a minute or less.
That 24/7,
It's 24/7, Carla. It is.
and given your global nature of Zoom, I would think
You have
so.
to have that. And
Yeah.
boy, I could tell you, boy, you got me started, Carla. So yesterday I had a problem in Australia. And so all I had to do was look up quickly the service and support number for Australia, and there were a couple numbers. So I shuffled that over to the lady in New South Wales, and hopefully she got the issue resolved.
And that global piece, you actually have to have that subject matter expert support. Even the customer support, you need that 24-hour in that organization because you are nationwide, right? That's one of the huge factors of really looking at what does that organization need to do to support their subject matter experts. Do they need 24-hour support? Do they have a resource where the subject matter experts are maybe out in some other area and they need different types of support? It looks like Sandy. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry I'm late. I work at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, and typically we're a little behind in totally adapting our, we're part of the Department of Defense, and we train our military linguists. And I've been pushing for an instructional design team because we have adopted Canvas, and getting some of the things you were saying just now, there's a lot of resistance now, and on both sides, because the teachers are, our subject matter experts. They're hired to teach languages, very high stakes instruction, and they need that support, exactly what you're talking about. But I'm trying to figure out a way to get change agents to actually create an instructional design team, either through our we have great support through, it's called DESIT, and they have, there are security and cybersecurity, but then you also have resistance from, well, the teachers, they can design an online course, and I know from being an instructional designer for a long time, it doesn't work. So do you have any recommendations on ways to be creative and introduce some form of an instructional design team to support our SMEs? Because it's really not fair to expect teachers to come in and not only have their linguistic background and the pedagogy we need, but also to now become instructional designers. And like you said, having to create their own videos sometimes, multimedia, everything it would take to teach a foreign language.
Ooh. So one of the recommendations that I've seen that happen to where the biggest change comes from the organizational support. It needs to come from not just you, but it needs the institution or organization actually needs to see the benefit. And if you can actually, and that's the hard part, is the need. It's actually selling that need to the leadership. The research institution that I went to, the leadership, one group actually put in a proposal, and they use data. So some cultures are the data. They want to see the data that goes with, yes, this is proven that subject matter experts are create better courses when they have all this support. And that support does include that media, that Canvas expert, because if you are moving to a new learning management system, that is another whole ball game, because if you're moving from one to another, they don't transfer that well from one to another. So they can't just pull their class in and half the things are broken. So it really is about doing that analysis and saying, this is what we need and this is why. There are some groups that are why, and there are some groups that are data. Finding that data to say, yes, this is what we need and this is why we need it, is usually how you can get that institutional or organizational support. And once you get that support, they put into place funding. Funding is a huge, huge aspect of getting that instructional design
Right.
support, because they say, oh, well, they teach already. They know this already. No, they don't. They don't know the Canvas system. They don't know the specific media items that they need and how to edit that, because has anybody here ever had to edit a video? So I have edited a video.
Just
I
the
went in-
front and the back, just the front and the, clipping off the front and the back.
I have had
I
to
know
take.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
Oh, no, and I hear you. I guess, funding, obviously we're working with the DoD and Big Army, and like they're supportive. Their whole system is based on this ADDIE model. And, I think, I have the linguistic background and the instructional design, so I go in, but the hours you spend and we do have a multimedia team, but again, it's a separate directorate. So it's a little more entrenched, and God, I'd love to have you come and and talk to them, but it's, I was just wondering if, your suggestions are right on, and I appreciate it. So I'm going to keep plugging away, and, maybe we can be in touch. I'll tap into some of your research, and that,
Yeah,
I appreciate
I would
it.
be happy to communicate. I actually left at the end of this. I've put my information in case you wanted to continue the conversation, because sometimes it's really about pulling that extra information into, can you use somebody from the media? Because I've seen a lot of schools that have an audio visual or organizations that have an audio visual team, but they're not working with the instructional design team. So they're not really playing in the same sandbox, and they're different, separate silos. So that's the hardest part is looking at the numbers and the data to say, this is why we need this. And this is why it needs to be this group that works together. That is a great question. It's really hard to get that buy-in sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you, because I have to log off again, but thank you so much. I know.
Yep, she'll have it recorded and it'll be posted, so you're welcome to come in later on.
I'm going to share. I promise. Anyways, bye, you guys. Have a good weekend. Or no, it's only Wednesday. A good week. Sorry.
She's already gone. We're already on the weekend. I like it.
I know. Thanks.
So thank you.
So then Sandy's going to list that. Let me give you another model that you could use. I worked at UCLA for a long time, and at one point there were 70 international subject matter experts who were assigned to me. Each one had an individual 3 to 6 hour credit course to put together, and I worked with all of them over an 11-month period of time. Help them create videos, help them write the courses, mounted all the courses on Canvas and so forth. So, it can be something that one person can do. It's just that it needs to be sort of spread over a period of time. But it's a good model, and it worked pretty well for all of us at UCLA.
It would be interesting to see how they did that. Go ahead, Philip.
Just to recap a little bit about what Carla said earlier, and you said as well, I think you need to keep in mind how difficult it's going to be for your instructional design expert, if you bring one in, an ISD specialist, to help you along developing the right kinds of courses or effective courses. And I would say, having taught foreign languages and taught also fighter weapon systems, those are topics that are going to require, if there's a separate instructional designer, it's going to have to require some understanding of that material. And that was what you were saying, Carl, a little earlier. So I would say, based on that, but some of it you can't, you're not going to find somebody, hey, you need to be fluent in French. Maybe that'll work. Be fluent in conventional weapon systems for fighters. Your model then should probably shift more towards having the subject matter expert get trained as an instructional designer, as opposed to looking for salvation, if you will, from a company that will go out for hire. So the closer or the more understandable the material is to the instructional designer, which again, when you're talking about foreign languages, you're talking about fighter weapons, you're going to have difficulty matching that up. So there, your model may be train your instructional designer, take a break, get that person trained out. Fortunately, that's what happened to me. I was sent to instructional design school and made all the difference. Nevertheless, what's funny is I came back and they had instructional designers set up in our unit, and he or she had the last word on what went down on your lesson plan. And that made for some interesting discussions because I could speak instructional design, so could that person, but that person had no knowledge whatsoever of fighter weapons. So we got in these ridiculous discussions about what would be more effective. So I would say, and it's not fair to instructional designers. So, you know, how do you do good instruction? And even in foreign language, if you isolate that in general, there's really no way to generically, unless you're talking about very general on instructional, on teaching foreign languages. When you get to where the rubber meets the road, and you're in the classroom and you're teaching and you're designing curricula and that sort of thing, you really need to have a mastery of the language itself. And so that's where something like that, you can't expect somebody to be able to know, hey, what's the best way of teaching definite articles or whatever. You're gonna have to have somebody who has that knowledge. So keep in mind that hiring out is good if you're looking for something general, or someone that if they could read the material and understand it, I say a management course, which would not be too detailed, although they can be, where they can at least understand the language behind it, that then you'll have a greater chance of success.
And sometimes that instructional design support is that training, or that training on instructional design. At one institution, the research institution, they actually put the faculty through that 3-month work with an instructional designer. And what happens is giving them little tidbits here and there of instructional design. Their other courses, not just the online courses that they work with the cycle group, their other courses expand and actually do better because now they've got that information. So if they're teaching a weapons or language class, and they've gone through some of that instructional design training, then they can move forward with actually building better. I know the one lady, Sandy, that just left, as she said she had another meeting. There's a lot of different references there. Do they train their subject matter experts for instructional design so that they can do it? Or maybe they need to bring in one media person, teach them how to do instructional design. There's a lot of different aspects to look at. And that actually rolls right into my next slide, which is planning for best practices. So what does that analysis say? Philip, you've brought up a couple different aspects of, there's that language and weapons. That instructional designer can't just step back and be like, this is the best way to teach that, right? So maybe that analysis says you need an instructional design person that can teach those concepts to the subject matter experts so that they can communicate their course better. I've worked in a couple different industries. So there was one group I worked with, networking and technology, where it was more of a conversation with that subject matter expert to say, we're building this program. What do the students or participants need to be able to do at the end of this program so that we can look at it and break it into parts so that you know the best way from your experience and your subject matter expertise to build this. So that was one different situation. There was other situations where, as the instructional designer, they sent me their training materials. I manipulated it, made it into something that was more useful than just regular slides with everything on it, and then moved it into a training course that they could do online. So there's all those different aspects. So when you're planning for those best practices, what does the analysis say? What does that organization or group or just this one section need? Do they need full-on employees, or do they need somebody that's coming from the outside? But it's, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the comments also, but then what design methods are needed? So what are some of those best practices that are needed? Do they need that consultant, or do they need a full-time employee? How do you need to develop that material? Philip, you talked about language and weapons. Is there certain things that they need to do to develop those materials? And you need an outside person to develop maybe a video some sort of training. I don't think I ever want to do military weapons training. So chemistry was rough, but you know, there's some of those where that subject matter expert says these are the things that they need to be able to do, and the organization can step back and say, well, these are the ways that we can support you in that. We can hire maybe at this point they hire an external video company to come in just for this particular training. That person knows exactly that external group builds something and then they move it into the course. I've actually seen some institutions that will hire a videographer, have them come in, do some of that videographer stuff, and then they're required to do all those other aspects of that video, which is cutting and splicing and making it perfect. And then all the subject matter expert has to do now is review it, verify it, and then drop it into the training or program that they're working on.
So Melissa,
Yeah.
that this is a really good discussion, and it's interesting. It's bringing a lot of thoughts for me, but personally, our training in the Navy was a lot of classified training, so it went all the way up to top secret level. So we had so many layers of protection that we had to think about for informational technology and design, and the people building the courses for us. So, you know, within the government, we have a lot of people on the call from the government, and so it can be complex. You have to comply with your physical security, your electronic security procedures, your knowledge of instructional design. There are a lot of different layers that have to be applied to the military training community for sure.
That is a huge, I've seen that, and I've actually seen the job applications out there for instructional designers where you actually have to have a level 3 security clearance. That might be one of those considerations they have to make when they say the support of that subject matter expert. What do we need? Well, we need the media group and the instructional design group that have the clearance that can come into our program and do this with and follow all of those guidelines, because then you have, it's not just cultural, it's that those other requirements that you are required to use. I'm going to use nursing. Nursing has some very strict guidelines, and they have to have certain contact hours and certain information, and they have to wash their hands properly, and they have to demonstrate this. So there's always going to be that third party. Sometimes there's third party accreditations for colleges, but in your case, in that military, there's all that security and safety. How can you support your subject matter experts with those guidelines? And that's one of those analysis pieces again, where you step back and say, what do they need and how can we go about supporting this? And with all those guidelines, especially safety, security with networking and communications and all of those pieces. I actually do have a son-in-law that works in the military groups and has that clearance. So I've seen some of the information, and that might put a damper on what you're allowed to do, but then it makes you step back. You have to step back and see, like Sandy, she has to step back if she actually has some of those requirements for her group. What are some of the ways to support those subject matter experts, but also follow the rules and the guidelines?
It leads to what your last point here on this slide, your evaluation practices or evaluation processes. So for us, we got evaluated up one side and down the other, maybe way too much. So at the end of every course that we did, we were evaluated by our peers and by our students. And that led us to continuously improving. And that's what we were after. So those course by course evaluations were quite important.
Sometimes it's course by course, and there's others where that self-evaluation of the program and the process that you're using. The research institution that I went through, they need to evaluate on a regular basis because needs are changing. So I'm sure things change in the military. I'm sure things change across organizations, and that evaluation process says, is this still working for now? Nobody here has probably heard, we've always done it that way. We're gonna continue to do it because we've always done it that way. Nobody's ever heard that, right? So so that is one of those places where that is part of that process of saying, you know, let's evaluate that course, let's evaluate that program, but let's also evaluate ourselves, and are we giving those subject matter experts what they need to do what we expect and the goals. And one of the other pieces on that is, do they know what is expected? I've worked in some areas where they don't know the expectation of what they're supposed to be building and what they're supposed to be doing. So that is, again, support on clarity of instruction, clarity of information. If we are using Quality Matters, which is that national quality assurance program, if we are using Quality Matters and another form to evaluate the courses in the technical terms, but then we're also using another piece to evaluate, you need to know what both of those pieces are before you build that course or that program or that training, right? So there's so many aspects that go with it. You know, I'm hoping nobody came here thinking, you know what, they're going to tell me exactly what I need to do for my organization. It's not possible. The biggest thing is to have a group. It can't just be one team or one person or one part of the organization. It's almost like stepping back saying, as an organization, what do our subject matter experts need to support our goals and missions of where we're going? Because if only one group is doing that, that is a very hard change. I keep going back to Sandy's information of, she knows what they need and we have all these pieces, but it's about the bigger group seeing the benefit. Once the research institution I went through, once the groups saw the benefit that was coming, more and more started coming in for that support and that benefit.
Melissa, I have to tell you that Philip and Jolly ran the Air Force network for many years, and for me, I was the second in charge of the Navy's network. And what we did is we had an easy task to convince people. We flashed money. It's called cost savings. So whenever we had to get tough with supporting our initiatives, Phil could do it in a blink of an eye. He could show how much productivity he was creating and how much taxpayer money he was saving per student. And it was incredible. It is incredible.
That's a skill. that is a great skill. And I think Sandy's going to want to talk to you. Sandy's definitely going to want to talk to you, because I'm sure she'll see the benefit in that, because sometimes financial is the only thing a group can see, is the financial. But if you can actually add that financial with the participant success, right?
And this is not just the military, this is government
everywhere.
And frankly, this is higher education and K through 12. And I mean, it really just goes from all aspects of education and training.
It also goes into corporate training. I did work for a company. They were nationwide, Hawaii, Guam. One of the reasons we tried to convince some of their traditional group that only wanted things face-to-face, we needed to convince them that travel from Hawaii for a week or a one-day training was not a great return on their investment. So when they actually had a group of 20 people come from Hawaii for a training that we could have built in a different method, you know, that's sometimes it's moving them from tradition, because this was an 80-year-old company that had been very successful, but transitioning them into what if we can actually put this in a couple segments in an online format, so anybody can do it. If you want to build your skills and your employees, this is how we can do that. And that return on investment is huge. And yeah, their travel went way down during COVID. It was very interesting to see their changes.
Necessity is the foundation of survival.
I think COVID benefited some groups because it actually made them go forward. Some of the institutions,
Yeah.
I've seen institutions that are now closing because they did not transition into good online formats. They could not go with what was happening in the emergencies, and some transitioned well, and they're building they're getting a return on that investment for all those subject matter experts they put through training. So Phil, I'd probably love to dig in your brain how you convinced everybody. Give us an example of maybe how you implemented that. Like, did you discuss it with somebody, and did you have some sort of formula? I want to know.
Well, I was talking about formulas. Probably the one where we had the great success was with the medical community. And fortunately, I had on my staff a gentleman who understood medical training, the medical continuing education. And so we talked about using satellites and that sort of thing. We were able to show the cost effectiveness and I was one that always very conservative as far as claiming saving a lot of money. I said at the very least, and at one point I just cut it in half as far as the cost benefit analysis. But it's a matter of putting together and it's not easy to do as far as putting together all the costs or even comparing with other media. But the idea is that you take the costs of travel and the missed opportunities as far as training and serving other medical personnel or serving patients, get a
And
cost on that.
and related expenses, which is
Yeah, related
lodging.
expenses. Well, yeah, of course, all of that. And you get that from the medical community. They can tell you what it's costing them to send people on site. And then we have our entire cost, which is very simple formula. Take everything you spend all year long and divide by the number of students. And that gets you down to student hour. So the most important metric you could come up with is the cost of training per student hour. Because people say, well, you save $1 million. How do you save $1 million? Compared to what? And so you come up with a cost per student hour on in-residence. And I could do it just counting travel and per diem. I didn't even have to get into all these, a little bit sketchier numbers. But because distance learning, pretty much any form, is going to beat any form of in-residence training. And so it's not that hard to make the do. You just have to make sure you understand the numbers that you're using and that they're honestly derived. And then cut it back. So you can say, what's the least that? We actually figured this, but we're cutting this in half. At the very minimum, you get half. Now in medical training, this is like tens of millions of dollars. It was pretty easy to convince in that sense. So we showed this is the cost of what it costs. We take all of our expenses on running the network, and that's easy because I actually was a program manager, so I knew all the expenses of running a network, and then divided by the number of students that completed their course and for which they got continuing education credits. Because when you start getting in satellite and other media, you can do a lot of other things too, but they may not lead to continuing education credits, which means, am I meeting my mission? It's nice to have all this stuff, but how effective is it in meeting my mission? What am I paying for? So those are some of the factors, just in very general terms, of how to defend your argument. But I would say, especially when you get into discussion, well, if you do it online, you say, well, what about the cost of refurbishing the course? What about the cost of maintenance, the annual contract with the distributor, so on? So all those have to be taken in, and that's where the part gets a little difficult, because sometimes it's difficult unless you're dealing with something like satellite or something that has an annual cost that's pretty much fixed. And that's where it's a little harder to compare. But I would say whatever you do, you need to get it down to a cost per student hour, because that's the most important thing. What does it cost to get this individual trained on this subject? And if you can beat that, then really you've won the game. But a lot of people don't use that metric, and that's what I think sold it every time I showed it, is that this is what you're paying for in residence. This is what you'd be paying if you went to this system.
And to Phil's point, that's a cost benefit analysis, not to be confused with return on investment or ROI. There's a difference.
Exactly. Now that could be cost avoidance, cost savings too. Cost avoidance meaning that, well, you'll be using the same amount of money, but you're getting more people trained. That's kind of a cost avoidance. You get more people trained for the same amount of money. That's cost avoidance. And then the cost savings, where you're able to now reduce your training budget because you've moved these students to another medium.
And to Phil's point, in the Air Force, we work this together, is that you do not save money because you're restricted by Congress in your budget, can't exceed your budget. What you do is significantly reduce the cost of that output.
Mhm.
Hence, the lowest common denominator is cost per student hour.
And then they take those extra funds and they move them somewhere else, right? So,
Oh,
Well, they can,
that's
but you know,
another
you have to-
strategy entirely.
Yeah, but if you're someone who just wants to save Uncle Sam some bucks, and you say, well, I'll worry about that next year. I know you can't, I mean, I lived in reality too. So I knew that there's a limit, but if I can show some cost reduction without necessarily giving away the farm, you know, then that was effective as well. Because
Mhm.
especially when they're saying, look, you're not getting any money, and their programs just closed because they didn't know, they couldn't adapt. So
Mhm.
where, you know, at one time they cut my budget in half. Could I adapt? Yes. I'm going to get everything they wanted to, but I had a good enough handle on the money that I knew where I could save money and that sort of thing. And that's cost savings by the fact the government's coming and taking your money away. So there sometimes you do get that, and of course, who knows what they did with it or where that money went to, as Jolly says. But
One
anyway,
of the things, I mean, to transfer that over to another situation, I work for the community colleges in California, 109 of them. And we were, this is back in the early 90s, and we were trying to get all of them to go into distance learning. And everybody wanted to offer English 101. Every last bloomin' one of them wanted to do that. And what we finally convinced them to do was, we don't need 109 English 101s, we need one. Then we can take that 108 pieces of development money that we haven't spent and do advanced courses. So, they're very practical ways of thinking about how do you actually save the money and what do you do with it? So if you don't spend it in the first place for the government, but you can offer advanced courses or different material, then you really got something. And that's where distance learning really becomes a major advantage. Of course, what I always loved about the Air Force is that my idea of doing a satellite delivery is I had one satellite uplink and a 500 downlink someplace. And Phil's idea of satellite was you put up 2 satellites and you just let them cross. I always loved that.
So that actually makes a great point where they talk about that practical way to use funds. Some groups actually have like that fund limitation. So in that analysis where they're looking at what their subject matter experts need, what is the funds that they have available to actually support them also? So there's that cross review of, that practical application of funds. They might not be able to cut funding, but they might have like that limited funding where they can't spend any more than this because that's what they're allowed for whatever program to support their subject matter experts. So those are fantastic points.
As an instructional designer, you can also develop a course. If you know that that course is going to be in business for 5, 7, 9, 10, whatever number of years, as an instructional designer, you build the course initially so that you know which chunks will probably need to be replaced in the future. So you can go in and pull that chunk, put the new one in, and you don't have to redevelop the entire course. You just fix pieces of it and update those pieces in the same way that you might replace a book. That's because the book is now out of date.
And that's why you don't develop a 2-hour video, because you can't break that into smaller parts and delete it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you've got all the original raw video, you can do anything. You can, you can definitely re-edit it. But I mean, there's plenty of editing possibilities. I am a video editor, so yes, I can do that. No, I can't do it on my iPhone.
Philip, what were you going to say?
well, I was going to add kind of and this may not apply to most people here, but I know we did run into an issue where we did an analysis on what courses in the School of Civil Engineering here in the Air Force could be done by distance learning. And it turns out that 90% of them could be done by distance learning, one fashion or another. And one of the courses, the instructor came back after they filled out the survey saying, can you do this? Can you do these learning objectives by distance learning? The answer was yes, 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 yes. And he came to me and said, look, the problem is we have an initial course And basically we bring all the civil engineers, all the people who come into the Air Force to become civil engineers, we all bring them here together at the same time. And this is the only time in their careers that they will be able to get together and meet each other face to face and start networking. But you know, if I follow your guide, Phil, I can't do that because it says that all my learning objectives can be done at a distance. I said, well, that's because you're telling me that the learning objectives in that course are not your real learning objectives. Your really learning objectives is to bring the civil engineering community, build that sense of camaraderie and community, and you're using the course as a catalyst, an introductory course, but your goal is not to teach the course. The course is to bring people in and so that they maintain professional relationships throughout their career. Yes, that has to be your objective. So I would say, you know, think about that. You know, not everything go, well, we already know not everything go by discipline, but here's one where you really don't have a good defense other than, but I would say if you're going to win it all in this one, you're going to have to defend the issue, not that your course can be done at satellite, but that there are objectives clear, and the most important objectives cannot be met through distance learning.
Mhm.
And so I keep that in mind, you know, that
Amen.
when you need to develop a course, you take a look, can this really be done? Are you really, and this is where you need to ask the instructor, is that really your objective, just to get them through the course? Or do you have yet an ulterior motive, if you will? Well, you need to make that your point if you're going to survive as an in-resident course.
Mhm. That's a great point. So one of the last points I actually have on this planning for best practices is the best practices are connected to the needs. And just because there are items available doesn't mean they are the best practices for your particular situation or the goal of the course or training. As Phil just said, you know, sometimes it's that community building and they absolutely need that, or that is their objective. But I recall sitting through an interview recently with a group, and an instructor, or he was going to be an associate vice president, said, well, my faculty or my subject matter experts are telling me that this Articulate 360 is the next best thing. Well, if it works for what your goal is, maybe, but it might not be the best thing for what you're trying to do. So if the group is trying to make sure that the subject matters can maintain their own materials, then that subject matter expert needs to be able to use that Articulate 360 program efficiently, right? So Zoom, I am not an expert in Zoom at all. I know there's some serious tools in there. I actually have an old coworker that is a Zoom guru because they used it for a bunch of meetings and trainings. So that's another question. Is that Articulate 360 that resource that you want to use? Or do you go with something else? Maybe there's resources.
Oh, that's an easy answer, Melissa. You go with Zoom.
You go with Zoom, right?
Of course, of course.
Unless you're familiar with Articulate 360.
Yeah, Articulate 360 or Rise 360 can be, if you're a tech person, you can probably manipulate through it. But again, that support of the subject matter expert in one institution, they go through that cycle of instructional design and course development. Well, when they're done with that cycle, they don't go back to the large instructional design group. They have a smaller group that is like a help desk, kind of like what Russ is talking about. They got 3 levels of help desk. Well, that help desk does not support their updates of the Articulate 360 program. So is that resource beneficial? That is one of the big questions that is out there is as you're building support, as you're discussing support for your subject matter experts, what are the tools they need and what are the tools that they will be able to use later depending on your support? So Russ says Zoom has 24-hour support. So I know I can use Zoom in any aspect and get support whenever I need it. So I might jump to Zoom to say, well, I don't like WebEx. Sorry, I'm going to throw that out there. I've used it. I don't like it. So WebEx is another form of virtual meetings that takes a whole lot of bandwidth. Zoom does not. So we're going to go with Zoom because I have participants that need that bandwidth and that reduced bandwidth because they don't have that bandwidth where they are. So we're going to go with Zoom instead of any other program because we need that benefit of the bandwidth. So those are other aspects of
Make sure you send me your resume, okay?
Sure. So it was really a struggle. I worked at an institution where the students and the participants, it was a college, and it was a low income college, and they really had gosh, they were having the students download some crazy stuff. Well, the students were truly using their cell phones for class. So the bandwidth was not accessible or even usable. So those students couldn't even exceed. So
Yeah.
actually working with that subject matter expert to say, hey, use Zoom. We have Zoom integrated into our course. And I'm not even trying to like brown nose or anything here. I'm not even like trying to be all Zoom is great, but I've seen where Zoom worked for participants because maybe they are in a military base that has low internet and they need that resource, but they can't use any other like WebEx or anything like that because it won't work. They can't get the information. They can't even listen to the conversation because it keeps breaking out. So that is
Yeah, this is Melissa, the bandwidth utilization and optimization has been a topic that all of us have been researching and working on for years and years and years, and it's getting better and better and better. Not only if you're X company, X collaboration company, but if you're any of the collaboration companies. I just had to brief a customer this morning on what's coming next week, and there's another tool that helps optimize the use of bandwidth, and it's called Mesh. You may know that from implementing networks in your homes. If you use a mesh network, it conserves bandwidth. And so it's spreading to the entire collaboration, communication, and training communities, including the government networks of conserving bandwidth. So we've been on this track of continually using less bandwidth and having higher quality and data transmissions. That's where we are. And it keeps getting better and better, Jolly, as you know. In the past, we worried about bandwidth, and today it's not much of a worry.
Well, in some rural communities, bandwidth is a worry. We take it for granted, but yeah, there's a lot of rural areas in most of the states that have very, very limited bandwidth next to dial-up.
Yeah, there's some that still have dial-up. I've worked with teams in a few organizations as well, and everybody has to turn off their camera if one person is speaking, depending on how big the group is. So that is, again, going back to that support of that subject matter expert and the goal of the participants. How do we support that subject matter expert? Is it with Zoom or is it with another program? Is it with an expert that we hire in, or is it with an expert that we pay as a consultant? And again, in those federal government programs, you talk about all the technology and the security and all those pieces, and those are all those pieces that you have to take into consideration when thinking, how do I support my subject matter experts with the culture and the restrictions that I have in my organization?
Well, web conferencing or Zoom is just one piece of the tool chest of an instructional designer.
Yeah.
If it's great if it's a synchronous course and you have to see each other. That's a different level. You look at Bloom's taxonomy, and that may be the analysis synthesis level. But the lower levels, you may want to have asynchronous learning modules or micro learning, teaching the basics. It's like teaching somebody how to swim. I'm gonna throw you in the deep end, and your goal is to get to the other side and don't drown.
Yeah,
and they flounder, they get the other side, but it wasn't a pretty picture and it was pretty inefficient. Same thing with instructional designer. They have to design a course, give them the basic knowledge, what they need to know, not what everything an instructional designer has to know. Just the basics. For example, you mentioned the Air Force flight training. There's a lot of classroom education before the training even starts. There's the classroom instruction weeks and weeks of the aerodynamics of flight And ultimately, the training is how to fly an airplane. A doctor goes through a lot of education on how the heart works and then trained on heart surgery. An accountant has to understand the principles of accounting before or get trained in the spreadsheet. So the point is that the different type of delivery tools, Zoom certainly being one of them, but there are other tools out there that will just give them the basic information that they need to help in designing a specific course.
So then supporting that subject matter expert, what is the basic information that we need to give them? Like in Sandy's condition, maybe they need to give a little instructional design training to those subject matter experts, but do they have time? And how are you supporting those subject matter experts? And that's every organization and institution will have to step back and look at their own plan. The military has one way, college institutions. Capella is a mostly online organization, right, Carla? So they support their teachers and their subject matter experts one way, while an institution that has been a teaching institution but a face-to-face institution, they actually have to transition a little different to support those subject matter experts, because they're still transitioning. If I recall, Capella started as an online school. I'm not quite sure, but if some of those organizations started as online organizations, they have a different change that they have to go through to support their subject matter experts. And some of those institutions that have been around forever that have been pushed and required to change, how are they supporting those subject matter experts to encourage them to change? Because there are institutions where the faculty say no, or the subject matter expert says, no, I don't want to have to do that. There was quite a few retirements at a few of the institutions that I've seen where they didn't want to have to transition. So how are you supporting those subject matter experts at every different level? Like the novice?
Really, I mean, if you're going to move to online and you've got a bunch of people who have never taught online, traditionally what people do is sit them down and they do a face-to-face training, which is ridiculous. You should put them online in the system that they're going to be using and let them learn by doing. And it also gives them the experience of being a student in that system, so that when they become an instructor in the system, they have a much better understanding of what it's like to be a student, because been there, done that, got the t-shirt. So
but they also have examples of some of the possibilities of what they can do when they put their subject matter online. So it changes some of their perspective, and it goes back to that knowledge and experience. So you're building them an experience where they're actually learning about creating for online, but they're also learning about what can happen online and how can I put some of my material on there where it's a quick knowledge check, where it's just a click button. And it's like, wow, I don't have to build this entire other piece for the students to get that information. And that's actually, again, changing that experience. So experience makes a difference.
Well, back to the start of your presentation, we talked about knowledge construction. That's exactly what this is about. How much knowledge does that SME need to know to convert a course? Does it need to know the history of ISD or the ADDIE model? The basics, give me the basic information that I need to get the job done. And some of that is education. Education learning theories, cognitive learning strategies. The training is how to use something like Articulate 360 and or Lectora Instructional Authoring System, Adobe's, those other products out there to put it together to deliver it. So you have a delivery, which is immediate. Zoom is a delivery tool. But if they don't understand the basic information, they don't know what to do. Years ago, my son and I were rebuilding a car engine in a car, and I told him to use this wrench here and torque it down to 16 pounds of torque. And he looked at me, puzzled, and goes, "What's torque?" Oops, my bad. I had to educate him in what torque was for it to have any meaning when you're actually applying it. So education is more the why, the training is more measurable in the output, but they go hand in hand. There is a difference between education and training, but there's a large gray area in there, is when one stops, one stops. So the SME needs to have maybe micro learning modules on the basics of developing learning objectives, multimedia design development, and then actually have to put it all together in some sort of an
Mhm.
output.
And then again, with that, with any organization, does that subject matter expert need to do all those pieces, or do they need to give you the material to do those pieces? So one
right.
institution, that research institution does have a media team, an instructional design course development team, a project management team, and then an actual support team that is that level of calls. So there's all those different aspects, but if they go through that development cycle, they get that conversation about what learning objectives are and course objectives, and it is very interesting how many subject matter experts you speak to say, what is the goal of your course, or what is the curriculum for this course and the course objectives? And that is a long conversation sometimes that takes, depending on the subject matter expert. So again, it's reevaluating, what does that subject matter expert need, but what also can your organization provide, and what does your organization need to provide for what you are working on. Again, the military has a whole lot of other restrictions that maybe a corporation or a university or college institution doesn't need, but there's still that foundation of, you have subject matter experts. How are you going to support them? And how are you going to analyze that information to see what is the best for your organization?
Melissa, did you read my course syllabus on my intro to instructional design course?
No.
You just read it.
I will take that as a compliment that I know what I'm talking about. It's really interesting to see. I worked, I actually had the opportunity to work at multiple different institutions. I did grant jobs for a while, and I did an accessibility grant. I was the accessibility trainer for one institution. And if you want to talk about screaming and crying and yelling of subject matter experts that did not want to have to do this training, but it was a requirement across the entire system, working with those subject matter experts to have them comfortable with the information and giving them just what they need. Just like any subject matter expert, I'm not giving them the whole instructional design aspect. We are giving them the information they absolutely need so that they can understand why accessibility was important at that institution and why they had to do it. It was a very interesting practice to sit with all the different levels of faculty, and that was like a huge experience. And with that experience, I moved into a couple different other things, and it really just adjusted how you speak and how you work with those subject matter experts, because we had over 250 faculty that went through that training, and we had to build it so they could all do a little piece of it. So I'm sure it was no military handguns or, any of that, but it was, it might as well have been, because some of them were very, very, very upset about having to go through the training because they couldn't see the purpose of it. So it was breaking it down to say, as a subject matter expert, this is why this is important for you. So it's
Exactly.
Mhm.
They don't need a 5-course meal. They just want a PJ and B sandwich.
Yeah, I'm allergic
That's
to peanut butter.
all I need is a snack.
Yeah, it's
Don't
really
need a
about
buffet.
what do they need? And again, going back to that subject matter expert support, what do they need? What do they need to reach the goal of this particular program or training? And sometimes you need to adjust. Sometimes you just need to adjust what the support is. And maybe that's a temporary support with a consultant, or maybe that is a full-time person, because that is a high need in your area. And that's why, coming into this, you can't just say, this is the formula or the antidote for subject matter expert support. It really is looking at the system, looking at the group, the organization, and seeing what do they need, why do they need it, and how are we going to implement that? So,
and that's the genesis of instructional design, whether or not you use the ADDIE model, the Dick and Carey model, human performance technology. It starts with analysis phase, identifying the knowledge gap, what they currently know and what you want them to know.
it's
And
really
in
about-
between
yep.
is a lot of different tools you can use.
Yes, there's no formula. There's no formula for any of it. So that actually brings me to the end of, I didn't think I was going to be able to fill it, but it was great conversing with everybody and having some feedback. Is there any questions, comments, further points anybody would like to make?
It's interesting to see that, Phil and I 30, 40 years ago, maybe longer, when we were both active duty in the Air Force and assigned to the Air Force Institute of Technology, where there was significant resistance to going. Back then it was interactive multimedia. Today it's online. That still exists today. We encountered people there at the Institute, and Phil probably remembers this, that the only way they can learn is if I look them in the eye. Well, then I can tell if they're learning or not.
I've actually seen subject matter experts that have assumptions that every learner or participant they have coming into their course knows how to use technology. And they know how to use an iPhone or smartphone or every form of technology. So as an instructional designer and a developer, I always step back with subject matter experts to say, what will your students need to be able to do? Like you said, some need that you right there, looking them in the eye, telling them something, but it's also that stepping back to say, don't assume that your participants can do something. I worked in an area, in a very low populated area, where the students didn't always have running water or power in their house. So supporting that subject matter expert to look at the big picture. Or, I worked with those subject matter experts in that accessibility where I had to be in the classroom. I had to be in their mouse clicking with them and walking them through every step of the way. So there's always going to be the different needs. How are we going to support those different needs? Everybody got quiet. Is it lunchtime there or dinner time?
Not sure. Well, listen, maybe you could talk a little bit more about accessibility. We have a board member, Helen Chamberlain, who worked for
GSA, I believe.
GSA.
And so she was responsible for writing a lot of the accessibility policies, guidelines, and then helping people to understand what they were and to enforce them. And so we've done, a number of these webinars on that. So typically in working with SMEs, I have found that they really have very little knowledge about accessibility or what's available or how they could do it or even why they should do it or why it's important. Did you run into anything like that? What do you think about that? How do you think that we should be working with SMEs to help them understand the importance of that?
It's actually putting it in a different perspective. So I have seen where if you explain it a different way to a subject matter expert, depending on the topic that they are teaching, the topic that they are comfortable with in their experience, it's about presenting it, giving them examples of this, that, and why. So maybe we're doing closed caption on a video, and they're like, why do I need closed caption? Because they and then you step back and you explain it as, this is not just for the student that cannot hear. This is for the student that has 3 kids behind them screaming and yelling, and this is the only time they have to watch this video. And that caption actually helps that participant get the information they need. Or somebody's on a train or a bus, or maybe they have low hearing, and that the tone of your voice is at that tone that they cannot hear. So it's really about sometimes explaining it in a different perspective to say, this is required. This is, and somebody just mentioned, Margaret just mentioned ADHD. Yes, there are so many different reasons why that closed caption works for the multitude of participants. And it's not just because somebody can't hear. It's for reading disorders, cognitive disorders. It's for all those aspects. And I've seen over the years that if you can give an example and explain it a little differently and maybe connect that subject matter expert to the purpose, then it changes things. I've had, let's see, gosh, I've worked with so many different groups, nursing, chemistry. When you actually try to explain to chemistry, why they might need, if it's a certain class, why they might need that DNA model in a 3D model, because somebody cannot see all the colors. They might be colorblind, they might be low vision or any of those, and you can actually print out a 3D model where they can touch it and they can feel it and they can understand the concept. If you say triangle to a blind person that has never seen anything, how do you represent that? Can it be a tactile piece? So it really is about communicating what that accessibility piece is. And sometimes is it closed caption? What are we trying to explain? Are we explaining closed caption? Are we explaining technology use? Are we explaining website use? They now, different websites actually read horribly for some of those, the reader programs. So explaining to them, if you put headings in your document, a student can go through that, and it's almost like the letters that used to be on the side of the dictionary. You could just quickly go to where you need to go. It's really about that. It's sometimes it's format, sometimes it's something else. So it's really explaining to that person. I've worked with a bunch of different groups, and sometimes it really is stepping back and thinking, okay, what are they coming from? And what is their experience, and how do I connect to their current experience so that I can make them understand or be able to make the points of why they need to be accessible and what accessibility really means, because sometimes they have this whole idea of what it means, and it's really just adding headings to your document, and it's fine. And sometimes it's, please don't use PDF because those are torture to put tags and everything in. So it really is about, like, sometimes it's just format. It's explaining that in this format, it can be read better by multiple people instead of just that one student.
I think it also addresses a lot of different cognitive styles, because you're trying to put things into different ways that we learn. And so while you may be addressing someone who has a disability, they still doesn't mean that I can't learn from it.
Right.
And another thing, what I love in all the things that I do, I always make sure that we have transcriptions of whatever it is. Obviously, we do it for accessibility, but I find that, if I'm going to look at something, and particularly if it's a fairly long piece, I look for the transcription because I can read faster than I can listen. And so it saves time.
Exactly. And sometimes it's, I actually speed up videos.
Yeah.
I will actually select the speed, but I can read faster than I can listen. I actually used to have to transcribe some videos for a few faculty, and I had to speed it up because I was like, if they talk any slower, I'm going to die right here. So, you know what I mean? Yeah, sometimes it's really about the aspect of, sometimes it's time. Like you, I read faster than I can sit and listen to that video. And maybe I'm taking a bus, or maybe the colors on the screen are a struggle for me, and I need to read it more than I need to listen to it. But I'm going to listen to it as I read it, because a language learner benefits from closed caption and being able to read it and listen. And actually they're building their language skills while they're reading the transcript, and they're actually connecting vocabulary and many other things. So it's a multi-usable resource.
There's this other aspect of it as well. So for those who don't see or have low seeing ability, there is a voiceover describing what the scene is. I remember the first time I heard it, I was listening to a DIY, how do you fix a house kind of a thing. And they were doing pictures of water and birds were flying over. And suddenly a voiceover announcer came over and said, and there a bird flew by and it landed on the beach. And I thought, where in the world did that come from? Well, I had hit something that brought it up on my TV, and it was the first time I experienced it. Well, Helen Chamberlain knew the guy who had actually invented this. And so one of the interesting experiences I put myself in line for was a skateboard contest at the Olympics. And so they had the regular announcer and this special voiceover announcer to say what it was that was actually occurring on the screen for those who couldn't see it. And it meant that the voiceover announcer had to have this extreme expertise in skateboarding to understand what people were doing to be able to describe it. But that's another whole facet that's developing. And it's certainly something that it costs, it's going to cost some money to do it because of what it takes to do, not to mention the audio production of it. You have to maintain the regular moderator at one level, and then you have the secondary on over here, and sometimes they switch. And so it goes back and forth and back and forth. So it's a more complex audio production, but still really interesting and necessary to do.
Yeah, and they actually have to label the audio description, and then the speaker's name is on there. I actually worked on a film course where there was a silent Charlie Chaplin film. So we had to do an alternative assignment, and because we could not find that audio description anywhere, and it was a silent film. So
That's
yeah,
great assignment.
yes,
Really,
yeah, and it's a film production class, so it was quite interesting to find a different an alternative assignment for somebody that is completely blind, because there was no audio description. It was an interesting concept. So
It is.
So is there any other questions, or we are actually at 8 minutes till time? What I've done on this this last slide is there's a few that I know Sandy said she might want to reach out. So there is continue the conversation. I have my contact information here in case anybody wants to reach out and say, what about this? Where did you find that? Or just have a conversation. Sometimes some of the best ideas I have seen is in a conversation with a third party and somebody that's not in your organization that can step from the outside and say, what about this? Because if you are so stuck in that mode, you might not be able to see from the outside what might need to happen. I've worked in a couple different groups where grant positions and temporary positions where they needed a consultant or somebody that was third party that wasn't stuck in the culture and stuck in the organization for so long that they could not see past what has always been done. So that happens sometimes, and sometimes it's just a question of, I was thinking about this, and then you can bounce ideas off of others. So I've had a whole lot of fun doing that with many people. It says, let's see, the FGDLA resources webpage has several sources, white papers on ISD ADDIE developing learning objectives, instructional strategies, learning strategies, cognitive science, and multimedia development. So if you want to learn more about the instructional design and the ADDIE that I've been talking about, Jolly just noted that in the FGDLA resources, there are some resources out there also.
And we've also got the several webinars that I mentioned about accessibility, and including the one about describing the scene. And those are on fgdla.us as well. So all of the webinars that we've done for the last 2 years are up there. And really an interesting group of people and things. Melissa, it's just been such a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for doing this extensive workshop for us. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And I think everyone who participated was really enthralled by it. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It was actually quite fun to learn a little bit more about the military and some of the things that you guys have to do and some of the things I don't want to do. And then see where others' perspectives are, because every experience is a learning experience. So
Or the entire federal government. So it's a little bit of everything. I used to work for the U.S. Department of Education. I was a Fed. So, there's that. So I also want to thank all of the people who participated today. Thank you all for coming, and a special thanks to Russ Colbert of Zoom, and to Dr. Phil and to Dr. Jolly for being with us today, and several of my students who were here. We want to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and any other holiday that you like to celebrate. I'm not trying to select anything. So thank you for joining us today, and that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you and good afternoon.
thank you so much. You all have a great day.